The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered, even in 100 kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Good morning. It's lovely to be here with you all in this liminal time, this changing of year and seasons. And it's been a dark year, harsh both from the pandemic and from the election. And then the harshness leads to even more self-protection and isolation, further suffering. Having to shun contact is really bizarre. Not being able to meet live, not being able to come and go freely. There's so much death and hardship throughout the world. And then there's fearing illness and death, and maybe even having them enter your personal world. But for most of us, probably most of the people here in our Zoom group, are not out working in crowded and unsafe conditions. And families and friends have largely been spared. So the problems are less acute, but they're still so powerful. It's a chronic kind of suffering. Our world narrows, our actions narrow. We tend to move in ruts. We're lonely, or we're bored, or we're stymied. Now, I was, during the week, earlier in the week, I was preparing this talk, I found myself doing some inadvertent research on this topic of the being stymied in the pandemic. And that was, I was awake in the night for a few hours and felt how, in spite of being busy, because I've been very busy, with talks, sangha, renovation, garden development, home life. In spite of all that, I felt stale, narrow, and yet ungrounded. So being busy doesn't cure the ills of this year. But I was talking to Tony this week, and he shared with me some new words coined this year. And the one that caught my interest was Blursday. I don't know how many of you have heard of Blursday. You know, what day is it today? It's Blursday. Day after day, it's Blursday. You enter each day wanting to be settled, yet fresh, receptive, giving, awake, as Annette was talking about last week, awake to the gifts of this difficult year. But when the days blur into each other, and you can't remember what day of the week it is even, our minds get dulled, and it's very hard to be fresh and aware. When we're marooned at home so much, the days just aren't so distinctive, and there isn't as much to focus. And it's also very important to recognize that this hasn't been a wasted or crummy year. People have been saying that, but you know, people were born this year, people got married this year, people died this year. And sorrow is certainly not something to brush away. Even the frustrations of this year are not something to try to just evade and brush away. And it's been a year of generosity under pressure. And it's been the year of the flowering of Black Lives Matter. It's been a year of our precious short lives. But one of the main features of Blursday is being underscheduled. We're so geared to being active and working and valuing ourselves in terms of how productive we are, that an underscheduled life leads to depression and anxiety. And people simultaneously feel rushed and pressed while feeling under schedule. You know, I should be doing something, but what is it? And one of the problems of this year has been loneliness. Often mostly for people who are alone. If you're fortunate enough to have a partner or a beloved pet, you have intimacy, and others don't. One writer described what it's been like to live by herself in this misery of a year for her. She said, lonely as a cloud? No, I'm lonely as an iceberg, lonely as an egg. I'm lonely as the body is hungry 3 times a day, hollowed again and again by an ache that does not ease except with the sustenance of connection. Loneliness is a gap. It's an intense feeling, but it's also the feeling experience of a gap between the relationships you want to have and those you do have right now. And then another experience of this year, another writer called it wintering. She said, it's a period of life when you're cut off from the world, feeling rejected, sidelined, blocked from progress, or cast in the role of an outsider. We tend to feel like outsiders even when we're with people a good deal. And when we're more alone, more outside of the realm of our activities, we tend to all wind up feeling like outsiders. So these are, the underscheduled or lonely or wintering, the iceberg, are quite different responses to conditions like the pandemic. And they're also all alike. They're all painful. They're all stressful. They're all times when our life is drastically curtailed. And yet here we are living. They're all consequences, not only of our circumstances, but of our difficulty in accepting them. And that is really, in a way, what unites us, the difficulty of accepting. In all of our different situations, and even within this hemmed in by the pandemic, every one of us is having a very different experience. We're all acutely aware of feeling burdened, hemmed in, aware of what is missing, the freedom to move, other people, the opportunity to express our productive selves. And there's only a little we can do about our circumstances, our outer circumstances. And what we can do, we need to summon the energy and the will and the caring to do, not to slide back into the slough of despond. But our response to the circumstances, that's where we really have real agency, more than we think we have. Because our very awareness has been dulled by the stressful narrowness. So it's harder to be aware of our own agency, our own possibility. So all of these problems, inner problems of the pandemic, they're all connected to our future-seeking minds. It feels like we're all just mired in the present, but the reason it feels mired is that we're always thinking about the future, and we feel like there's a gap between us and something called the future because we're mired in the present. But a great deal of that suffering of burden and mired and stuck is because of our future-oriented thinking. Now, we come by future orientation naturally. There's every living thing needs to, in some sense, look forward to and plan and arrange to eat and to be sheltered and to reproduce and grow. But we take it a lot further than that as humans. We relate to the future as a hedge against what may happen. So a lot of what we're doing in the present is this hedge against possible future problems. The suffering is real. The isolation is real. The illness and death, above all, are real. But within that, much of our suffering is caused by this delusion of how it seems to us and how we think it should be. That's where our future orientation gets us into such trouble. This huge gap between how I think I am now and how I think it should be or will be or fear that it will be. A gap especially wide this year. A gap we all fall into. So when we feel we can't apprehend that the living quick of the moment, how can we live in terms of it? These endlessly, intricately interwoven, changing nature of things is the basic truth of Dharma. And when we feel bored or lonely or just stuck or in Blursville, we're not able we have trouble remembering that. And we especially need the Dharma then to bring us back to a larger view of the world in which we are larger beings and more natural beings. So, of course, the Dharma is not a doctrine, let alone a dogma. The Dharma is a word for the endlessly changing, intricately interwoven nature of things. It's shorthand for all of that. And the Dharma is a word for the nature of things, for the universe seen in terms of these universal basic qualities of change and interdependence. The Dharma is then furthermore a beacon lighting our way to remembering who we are, to waking up to life, to insight. Because we're far more than the sum of our parts, and we don't even know our parts. We're unconscious of so much of ourselves. You know, someone once said, probably aware of 5% of what's going on in and around us at any moment. I think that was probably a generous estimate, because it's all so complex. We are part of endlessly shifting networks that keep the whole afloat. And I recently saw a photograph, I think it was in the National Geographic, of that kind of community keeping afloat. It was about fire ants that get caught in a flood, water that they can't get out of. Now, fire ants can't swim. And so what they do is they clump together in a very large mass that can float. But in order for this mass to float, some of them are underwater and some are up there breathing and they don't have gills. And so this mass of fire ants keeps shifting so that the ones that are under holding the boat afloat, the community afloat, don't stay under there very long. When they run out of oxygen, everybody shifts and then they're up on top breathing. So this mass is one floating mass of an endlessly shifting little beings working together to keep the whole afloat. I'd never felt a fondness for fire ants before, but there it was. There it was. We have each other. We have the Dharma, keeping each other afloat. A far more precious resource, the Dharma and ourselves as enacting the Dharma, far more precious than any of us realizes. So the Dharma offers this great truth, but what does it mean to live in terms of it? In terms of the Dharma, in terms of reality, in terms of the natural order of things. How do we live with freshness, with presence, or with each other? For starters, in this particular year, as in all times, by using our dissatisfaction with life as a goad or a light to turn us to see the ruts and gaps we've fallen into. Because when we live in a rut, it appears to be how things are. It appears to be the truth. And in a sense, it's the truth of that moment, but it's only obviously a very narrow one. We can't really see the ruts we're in while we're in them. We need a light shining on that. And the Dharma and our Buddha, Dharma and Sangha are that kind of light. The root of all this dissatisfaction, of this gap, of this loneliness, of this iceberg, is our craving that things be otherwise. Our dissatisfaction is born of our craving. That's where the gap emerges. And that's where Shakyamuni and the Buddha Dharma began. It's still core to the whole great project of Dharma and of life. Shakyamuni identified craving as the root of human dissatisfaction. Craving for what we don't have, craving to get rid of what we don't want, craving to hold on to what we are enjoying now. We expend enormous energy in service of these cravings, with the result of shattered and bitter lives and of our dangerously depleted planet. Human craving is extremely powerful. So no wonder none of us has extirpated it from ourselves or from our world. Our greed and our hatred are expressions of this corrosive craving. And Shakyamuni saw how our craving, grasping, clinging, and rejection cause deep satisfaction, and how all this is based on deluded ideas about life and ourselves. The three poisons. And one of the many short sutras of Shakyamuni's life is of a monk who comes asking insistent questions about how did this come about, and who, and why, and how. And Shakyamuni says, if a man is shot by an arrow, it is not so important who shot the arrow. What is important is to take out the arrow. Well, to take it out, we would like to be aided by understanding the body and the muscles and how to remove the arrow with the least pain and see how it is caught. And what if it's a poisoned arrow? Then we have to investigate the poison in order to seek its antidote. So it's a practical tradition, take out the arrow, heal the wound, and it's an investigating endlessly. What damage has this arrow done? How do we take it out? Is it poisoned? What is the antidote? Now, sort of as an aside, craving has been misidentified with feelings and emotions endlessly throughout the history of Buddhism and the world. So to be sad or to be in grief is normal. To shun it or to cling to it is craving. To be happy or content or peaceful is normal, if sometimes rather rare. But to grasp at happiness, to buy a lot of things for the sake of contentment is craving. It's that clenched fist, that thirst that is our symptoms of this craving. And already in the earliest years of the Buddha Dharma, Shakyamuni and the monks and nuns gathered around him were investigating the roots of craving and what to do about it. So Shakyamuni saw that we need to disengage from the craving that produces our dissatisfaction. And so he produced a method. This is the taking out of the arrow, the method called the Eightfold Path, with meditation at its center. But it's a path for our whole life, all of our activities. And then these generations of scholar monks wanted to see the roots of craving. They wanted to know what meditation was accomplishing. And so they arrived at understanding that the root of craving is the basic delusion of our view of all things as separate and opposed, blinded from the reality of interdependent life, and our belief in a solid self endlessly fighting to shore itself up, blinded from the reality of impermanence. There's such deep suffering in this view of the solid self, endlessly beleaguered and shoring itself up, in this view of ourselves as separate and opposed. Deep suffering. And our Dharmic teachings are all investigations into this suffering that we are now facing, experiencing, and its remedy or remedies. And our very sufferings, when people, person after person comes to the Dharma because they're suffering so much. Our very suffering and our teachings about it encourage us to face our suffering. We can't do it on our own. We need a body of teachings. We need the practice of awakening. We need the Sangha. We need the three treasures in order to explore our suffering and dissatisfaction, to see through it, to drop it, to free ourselves from it. And we talk in Buddhism a great deal about dukkha, about suffering or dissatisfaction, not because we revel in gloom, but because it's a universal human condition, and because it is the entry point to the freedom from that suffering. The suffering, the wound, is the entry point to the freedom from it. So not brushing away a crummy year, but investigating it and living with it. So we have, each of us in our own little Zoom window, we have our ongoing practice of dropping off our busy, clinging mind. When we're sitting zazen and thoughts are bouncing around, we don't usually think of it as clinging, but there's clinging and craving, that we're wanting this idea or that idea, or wanting not to be having this idea or that idea. All of that is the old activity of clinging and craving. Our practice is letting go of the grasping mind, letting go of the delusion of things should be otherwise than they are right now. Because we cannot enact change well unless we accept where we are when we start. We're so unhappy with the present that we want to leap to some solution, but it's a weak leap if you haven't grounded yourself in understanding where you are, accepting where you are as the ground for change. Over and over, letting go of the central delusion that we're solid, separate, and opposed, because those are suffering. And they're not true. So when we let go of our grasping mind, our craving, we return to reality, to a more natural and peaceful life, momentarily, because delusions arise moment by moment. Katagiri Roshi used to say that delusion or ignorance arises with the first movement of your conscious mind, because that first movement is me versus you. I hear, you there, or this sucks, or that, I want that. Those first activities with which we separate and identify are the very arising of our ignorance and delusion. And so we have a practice that addresses it moment by moment. Because if you're going to have moment by moment arising of delusion, you need a practice that moment by moment addresses it. And it may seem as though it's only zazen that's dropping off. We describe zazen as shikantaza as dropping off body and mind. But all our practice is dropping off deluded views. clinging views. Our whole life in the Dharma is about dropping off the poison of separate and opposed. And so Zazen is one of our powerful practices, and in some ways a tool for understanding and having insight into, experiential insight into this arising of delusion and the letting it go, and the letting it go, and the letting it go. But we don't only do that in Zazen. We do it differently in other activities, where there's always the opportunity to be dropping off craving, to see ourselves craving and clinging and hating and pushing away, and to drop it off. But the world is so complex, our lives are so complex that we're all kind of like super hyperactive little kids. We are distracted every moment, and there's so much going on and we hardly know what to pay attention to. And so we have practices that offer a shape to this, to our daily life. And that's really what the precepts are. And there are many sets of precepts. The precepts are shapes or guidelines for being in the world, in living in terms of letting go of our craving, seeing and letting go of our craving, or living in terms of the reality of life instead of craving. They're templates for life. And there are many different sets of precepts. So in Soto Zen, Dogen Zenji shaped a set of 16 Bodhisattva precepts 800 years ago for monks and lay alike to be interpreted differently. Because for a monk in his era, the precept of not engaging in harmful sexuality meant celibacy. And for lay people, it didn't. And so different precepts are lived in terms of the world in which we live, but it's still the precept. So these are not fundamentalist beliefs. These are a template for our lives living in terms of reality, not in terms of delusion and craving and hatred. And within our 16 powerful and alive precepts, they're embedded in the middle are the 3 pure precepts. And I find the 3 pure precepts be a great distillation of the Dharma. So the first of the 3 pure precepts is refraining from harm, fulfilling vows and standards. And that will, of course, include, say, the 10 grave precepts around what refraining from actions and fulfilling those vows and standards. And Dogen said, this refraining from harm and fulfilling our vows and standards, he said, this is the source and abode of the laws of all Buddhas. This is not a pedestrian activity. This is a Buddha activity. Our Buddha activity. Human Buddha activity. The second of the pure precepts, fulfilling wholesome actions. We sometimes shorthand say, doing all that is good. Fulfilling wholesome actions, originally it meant cultivating the teachings and living in terms of them. Fulfilling wholesome actions. Dogen said, this is the teaching of perfect wisdom, and it is the path of the practitioner. Fulfilling wholesome actions. And the third pure precept is embracing and benefiting all beings. Embracing is a wonderful word. We sometimes just say benefiting all beings, but embracing and benefiting all beings is a wonderful word for the attitude of living by our interconnectedness. And it is part of Dogen's description of that third pure precept. So these 3 pure precepts are sort of overarching, and they're kind of simple. And they're so simple that there's a famous story about them that some of you, I'm sure, know, that in China, when a government official and his entourage on their horses came riding up to talk to a famous teacher about the meaning of Dharma. And they rode up and found him sitting in a tree. He was called informally Bird's Nest Roshi. I think he was the only place he could get away from everybody and be alone. The only place he had a little peace and quiet was, up in a tree. Katagiri was like that. I was driving him to the airport one day, and I said, "Gee, you travel a whole lot. Isn't that burdensome?" He said, "Oh, no. Up in the air, it's the only time I'm alone. It's the only time I can be alone and just be by myself." So Bird's Nest Roshi only had a tree. That was good enough. So the government officials, entourage, ride up and they look up to Bird's Nest Roshi and they say, "Well, what is the meaning of Dharma?" And Roshi answers with the three pure precepts. Refrain from harm, do what is good, benefit all beings. The official says, "Even a child of 3 knows that." And Bird's Nest Roshi says, "And even a person of 83 years can't do it." So it is a practice for your whole life, beyond 83 years. Haven't gotten there yet, but I hope that if I reach 83, I will still be practicing these 3 pure precepts. So the simplicity of the 3 pure precepts, makes them accessible when times are hard. We need something to maybe short or simple, like lighting a candle, like incense, like taking refuge in the 3 treasures, or like the 3 pure precepts to orient us, particularly in difficult times. So take a deep breath, exhale, bring the 3 pure precepts to mind. And maybe before that in the morning, light a candle. I lit my candles and incense and bowed to the 3 treasures before I sat down here this morning. It orients us to who and what we are, to our lives, to ourselves and each other. And then, if you have time, sit a little kindly so that you can open to the day, not grudging even the craving of your mind, because when you grudge it and kick yourself for it, you can't attend to it. And then carry the 3 pure precepts through your day. They aren't rules, they're path and direction. And you figure out for yourself how to manifest them in your life, in your day, in your moment. Because your moment is different from my moment and from your moment yesterday. And then in our pure precept ceremonies, the taking of precepts and the renewing of precepts, the 3 pure precepts are put this way: with purity of heart, I vow to refrain from all harmful action. With purity of heart, I vow to do all that is good. With purity of heart, I vow to benefit all beings. This vow brings us into our body. This is how we commit ourselves to turn toward compassion, to turn toward waking up. And purity of heart, well, we may not feel pure, but purity of heart is how we are when we vow. Beyond our conceptual ideas about it, whenever we take up the precepts, whenever we vow to follow them or fulfill them, purity of heart is there. And this great vehicle carries us far beyond the bruises and the frustrations of the pandemic. Even while we live here in the midst of it, not ignoring it, not turning our backs on it. This is as Joanna Macy said about the way to treat nuclear waste. She said, the thing to do about nuclear waste is have it above ground and have people sitting, facing it at a safe distance, watching it for all the tens of thousands of years it will take for it to disintegrate from its radioactivity. Don't turn away from it, don't bury it, face it. Like fire ants, we have to keep taking turns with a project like that. So the Bodhisattva precepts aren't rules and they aren't prohibitions. They're a template. for living awake to life, for living in accord with reality, because it is in being in accord with reality that we know peace, because we're not fighting against how things are. They're a shape, the precepts, a house we inhabit, big enough for all and with no limiting roofs and walls. In both the precept ceremonies and in our meal chants, won't it be wonderful to get back to a zendo where we can sit and for a day and do oryoki meals and chant together? I miss it. So in both precept ceremonies and the meal chant, we recite them all together. And we end with the line, because the 3 pure precepts are there in the meal chant. And we end with the line, may all together realize the Buddha way. This is the central vow of our practice. An aim and an intention underlying our practice of precepts, our practice of zazen, our practice of daily life, of engaging with each other, our practice of study. This year, as every year, may all together realize the Buddha way. Thank you. I will confess I spent the whole week in it's a kind of a craving state when you're working on a talk and want it to come out well. And you're not sure it's going that way. And here we are. Once I sit down at 10 o'clock with you all and then give the talk, I feel great relief, because I'm no longer craving. It's just, it comes out how it comes out, and you receive it as you receive it. So thank you. And I do enjoy that hard week of preparing a talk, because it makes me stop and think, which I don't do that much. So comments, questions, thoughts, the year, the precepts, craving.
So, I just want to say your talk was awesome. I really enjoyed it, and it really gave me a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holly.
Jisho.
Yeah.
Thank you. Words to live by, literally.
Yeah.
Really. One thing that rose for me during your talk was that I've had a lot of help from you over the years in Dokusan, and just listening to all the talks of all the priests, is having a deepening awareness of the difference between result and behavior, and kind of starting to understand that so much of my life, my behavior has been geared for a certain result.
Yeah.
If I live this way, then this will happen. If I'm good, I get this, and so on, endlessly. And finding out through a lot of pain and suffering that absolutely isn't the case, number one. With the best of intentions, things can turn out horribly. So I'm wondering, you're talking about future mind, and I have to assume that by future mind, you're thinking about, or you're referring to that whole notion of result, like this will happen.
Yeah.
And I'm going to gear my behavior in order to get it.
Or to avoid it, or
right.
To get it or avoid it. Whatever. There's all an idea. Yeah. That's that you're exactly right. That result mind, results oriented mind is that future orientation that is a chimera.
Yeah.
It's an idea, and ideas are great, but not when we believe in them.
And it leads to the whole thing that, again, has been just a tremendous lesson for you, the difference between result and direction.
Yes.
And
yes.
I that has been such, I want to just say thank you for endlessly comforting and healthy, I think, way to be, just for dropping result and just trying for direction.
We make goals and wish for particular result outcomes with the best of intentions, as you say, but they're really not effective, because our intentions are about something that is unreal. And so it's a lost cause and creates great suffering. So it's so important to, as gently as we can, not berate ourselves for falling into the trap of wanting particular results, like sitting and being awake and having a permanent peace, all those wonderful things we think about we ought to have, instead being alive in the present. The future is alive here in the present and nowhere else. Intention, that's what vow means, that direction. That's why the Buddha way is a way and a path. The ism part was a Western kind of imposition on it, kind of a thing. The Buddha thing, the Buddhism. It's not. It's the Buddha way and the Buddha path and the direction of vow, aspiration, intention. Big enough for us all. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you, Jisho.
Jisho,
Hi, Thomas.
hi. Thank you so much for the talk. I'm trying to understand how, because you need to be oriented, right? I guess I want to understand more about the direction versus the destination that Jude was just mentioning, because you need that goal to try to even figure out what the right actions would be.
We start out thinking of it with a goal, but actually, if you think of it, I want to become awake, all you know is that you're not. If you have a sense of direction, if you take that, instead of a goal that's an ending point, a result effect, and say, I want to go in the direction of waking up, I can do that now. I can go in the direction now of waking up. I can go in the direction now of being compassionate. Do I feel squenched and not very compassionate? I want to become compassionate. No, now I want to find a corner of my being with which I can express compassion. And that's so the direction is the path, in a sense, leading on, but it leads on from where we are now. So it's an orientation or a direction.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. It takes decades for us to even really believe that with our core, ourselves. We don't have what core we have because we are so geared to results and endpoints and competition for that. And every time, I remember in my early years and I used to sit alone. For 10 years, I mostly sat alone. And then I moved to Minnesota to train with Katagiri Roshi. And I would feel intense competition with the other people sitting there. I wanted to be the best student. I wanted to sit better, harder, deeper, longer, something. And what a hindrance. What a useless form of suffering. So it's the letting go of that allows us to be present and then have a sense of direction. So the goal can blind us to having direction.
Yeah. So I'm assuming this applies as well, because my craving is a feeling of home. A feeling of home.
At home.
Right. I've moved 5 times, right, since COVID started, right? I mean, I've had a very unusual trajectory. And I am definitely craving and striving and grasping after that feeling. And the craving and the striving and the grasping are bad, but the feeling of home is necessary as a human.
So if you're in a world, a life where right now, where you've moved 5 times and who knows, you could be moving again next month. So the only place to be at home is now, here in yourself. You have to find the ways to experience being at home with yourself, being at home in yourself, being at home in whatever way you can in your present circumstances, because they are going to, you above all this year, they're about to change. They keep doing that. So craving for something to hold still, the world doesn't. And so you're in like on a fast learning curve right now with that much moving around, where you really need to come to find the ways to see that here now in my own self, my own body is at home. Here today with Kaizen, I'm at home. Here today in the fog or the sun, I can be at home. Here today in this room that I may leave tomorrow, I'm at home. Knowing that all homes are provisional. The craving, the feeling not at home leads us to think that there's a real kind of permanent home that will stay put once we get there. Well, you know what? It's not going to happen.
It'd be nice though, wouldn't it?
Well, No, because that's Kurt Vonnegut's Ice Nine. Everything freezes solid. There's no change. There's no creativity. There's no development. And then you'll make a lovely little cozy home, and then circumstances will take you out of it. Of course, you can cry if you do have. I had a perfect home. It was my cabin in the woods in Massachusetts. It's 14 feet by 16 feet with a little sleeping loft and an outhouse down the path. And I lived in it with my partner for 5 years. And I wept when I had to leave it to go and move into the house I had built on the very same property because it was so intimate. And it's fine to weep for losing something that is beloved, of course. And then we come to terms with living where we live. So we can feel sorrow, we can feel a pain, a frustration at not having a more settled home, of course. But within that, this is where the only place you settle. Hope that helps a little.
Thank you, Jisho.
Yeah.
Jisho?
Hi, Donna.
Hi. I just wanted to comment on readiness for the precepts, because when I took my precepts, you came to me and you said, hey, how about this? And I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not ready for this. I haven't practiced long enough. I don't know enough about what I'm doing. And I just wanted to put out there that that I'm glad that I trusted you and that I overcame my typical kind of skepticism. And you once told me to hold that as curiosity, and I work on that all the time. And that I am so grateful that I did take my precepts, because it is such an incredible map for me on a moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day basis. And my life has opened up in so many ways because of it. So thank you.
We mostly don't feel ready to take the precepts. Some people do, but we do or we don't. That is sort of like, that's a flavor. The daisy, I like it, I don't like it, I'm ready, I'm not ready. One day we feel ready, one day we don't. The precepts take us places that we didn't know we were going to go. They're very powerful. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jisho.
Hi, John.
I really needed to hear this talk today. It just seems like this year, with this constant stress of the virus and the politics, and then on top of everything else, my dog has been severely sick since September. And, so we were stressed over the dog and, all the complications of the dog, plus the expense. We've spent about $10,000 on that dog, and we don't have the money, so, and I needed, it's just my brain has been just exploding with the stress. And, like last night, I had to get up like every hour because the dog had the runs, and I had to let her out every hour last night, like 6 times. And that's common with what she's going through. So anyway, I've just been so caught up in my misery and forgetting about the rest of the world. And I'm actually, I felt bad last night because then I started thinking about the dog and saying, oh man, I wish you would stop this, and then she'd be licking herself and I'd be lying there trying to sleep. And I'm saying, oh God, please stop licking yourself, and then it dawned on me that that's really, really going in the wrong direction. And I just want to say that, my Zen practice has really saved my life through this period. And also your teachings, and also you convinced me to do the precepts. I felt the same way as Donna. I said, because every year they talk about doing the precepts, and I would say, no, I'm not ready. And then finally I just said, well, I need to speak to someone. And you said, just do it. And I did. And you're right. It was really a big deal. And it really has changed my life. And now with the stress and everything, I feel like, especially, I needed to have your talk just to remind me of what's important in life, and that basically it is what it is, whatever's happening, that's how it is. and you have to just kind of accept it and say, okay, this is how it is. It could change tomorrow, maybe not. It doesn't matter. This is your life right now. And I needed to be reminded of that. And you did that just perfectly. And I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
So I guess we're all in the same boat. That's why I came up with what I wanted to talk about today. So many of us are having such experiences. Does anyone else want to say something?
Jisho,
Hi, Barry.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for your talk. I wonder if you could say something maybe about humility and grace. One of the experiences I've had this year is I don't consider myself a humble person. I wasn't born with that kind of, gift or blessing.
Can you come closer to your microphone?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah.
But this year, so many things have happened that have been humbling for me. Seeing people's response to Black Lives Matter, seeing people's response to the pandemic, really meeting Alice Jean in her transition, seeing my wife care for her dying father. All of these things were such blessed teachers to me. And then the other thing that seems related to me is just how, what you said in your talk, and I really related to this, how there's a kind of a tightness or a denseness in my being this year with all the fear and stress. And the things that seem to open me are often when, I see the full moon. I see a wild animal like a bobcat in the meadow. I see a cloud illuminated at sunset, and someone does something unexpectedly gracious or generous. Anyway, those things have really helped me in this really difficult time. So I'd love it if you would comment on how they relate to our practice.
Thank you for that. All of these, the world is full of grace, of moments and activities and words and people and songs and clouds that bring us beyond that open us. We forever are closing down and opening. This is sort of a natural flow, but we tend to get stuck in the narrow, and something breaks through, something of beauty, something different, but that we can relate to. There are days when we can't relate to that cloud or the sunset, but hopefully we can find something that will prick our inward little bubble and bring us out to feeling our already existing natural connection with the universe. We are part of the world of that cloud. And how wonderful that the cloud comes and reminds us of that. And we have the ability to meet it. And humility, craving when we're caught in our craving, we don't have time for humility. We're too busy trying to accomplish, and are very competitive with it usually, because we all experience this zero-sum game or this little pie. And humility is part of the life when we aren't engaged in that. So anything that reminds us of our humility is a practice of accepting being a natural small being. And there's such power and such ease in that when we get over the hump about how we ought to be so special. So the humility cuts through that I need to be special and I'm afraid I'm not circus that we go through in our minds. And grace is what is there coming to meet us. As Dogen said, awakening is all things coming to meet you, to greet you, not you reaching out to the world. So thank you. Yes. Should we go to the closing chant? No. Dojin Koren will lead that. I'll mute myself.
Okay, we put that in the chat. For great Bodhisattva beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.